Okay.
Thank you.
Should we dive in?
What?
Should we dive in? Like the look on your face. I don't know if I want to dive in. Well, I'm Rabbi Yonasan Bender. I'm a rabbi and therapist, so this is kind of like a hobby of mine. This is definitely not my day job.
So can we do like group therapy here also?
One-on-one section.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So this class is going to be covering something called the Yud Gimel Ikrim.
The what?
The Yud Gimel Ikrim, the 13 Principles of Faith. So, yeah, every culture. It's really interesting if you get into mythology and looking at different mythical creatures that different cultures around the world come up with, and generally they're all the same. One common mythological creature is a zombie. Everybody is afraid of zombies, and so from a psychological perspective, it's like, well, what's the archetype of a zombie? Why is everyone freaked out by zombies? And the zombie narrative is basically the same thing. You have all these ugly, falling apart creatures that they're walking and they look alive, but that's basically all they do. They eat brains and that's about it. But what's so scary about zombies? And what's more like, well, why would every culture be afraid of zombies? And it seems to be that zombies represent this sort of behavior without meaning. Now that's scary. Living your life meaningless, directionless, breathing, eating, and that's about it. That sort of creature only cannibalizes life. Those are zombies. Living without meaning. Living without direction. That's scary. So when a lot of people talk about Judaism as a religion, I've heard this phrase, it's Judaism is a religion of creed. Yeah? Have you heard that saying before? A belief, meaning. And I've heard this thrown around a lot that people kind of describe Judaism as it's a religion without beliefs. It's a religion about behavior. You do things. There are mitzvahs. There are commandments. But it's a religion without creed, belief. None of you heard that? Good, because it's a horrible idea. You're ahead of the game. Because that's really describing zombies. Meaningless, directionless life. Just doing without any real purpose. Now, it's sort of true, this idea that Judaism doesn't necessarily have a set creed. Compare it to other religions like Christianity. I mean, belief is the focus of that religion. A lack of belief in any of the axioms in Christianity, well, you're damned to hell. That's basically how that works. And most religions are basically geared that way. And so Judaism is a little bit unique in the sense that there definitely are beliefs that we have. There definitely are principles that the religion is based on. But it was never something that became a threat. A pain of death will burn you at the stake. You have to believe X, Y, and Z. So in that sense, Judaism is not a religion of creed, of belief. So what this course is going to be about, as we're going through here, this is going to be kind of spelling out, well, what beliefs does Judaism have? What are, and specifically, it's going to be centering around one particular figure, the Rambam. Have you guys heard of the Rambam, Maimonides, Moshe ben Maimon? Okay. So he was a unique guy. He was one of the first to actually organize all of the Gemara into a very clear halachic book called the Mishnah Torah. No one had ever really done that before him. And he was very much involved in developing a systematic belief system in Judaism. What do Jews have to believe? And if you kind of think about the historical timeline of Judaism, I mean, it's kind of weird that within Judaism, that sort of question wasn't ever really spelled out. You'll go through the Chumash, you go through the Bible. There isn't necessarily anything there that spells out what you have to believe. It's a religion, right? What are you supposed to believe? Well, there's a God. That's pretty obvious. But outside of that, it doesn't really spell out what's going on. Same thing with the Gemara. A lot of interesting ideas. If you guys have ever looked at a Gemara, it's kind of like a hyperlink text. You kind of think it's like the first internet, basically, where it jumps from topic to topic to topic in this seemingly random way, but it has some sort of a web. I mean, the word Masechta, which is another word for Gemara, actually means web. It's a web of ideas. So even in the Gemara, there isn't necessarily spelled out in this very clear way what Jews are supposed to believe. A bunch of ideas are thrown at you, but that's as far as you really get. So what this course is going to be centering on is exactly that. What are these 13 principles of faith the Rambam spelled out? And how did he arrive at these beliefs? And the kind of the struggle a little bit amongst other different rabbis, how the rest of the religious, the rest of the Jewish world took it. Some people were very, very happy. Some people were very much not happy. And there wasn't really a consensus amongst the early rabbinic authorities on the Rambam's principles, but somehow they withstood the test of time. And so now, you can find the 13 principles of faith in every siddur. The back of the Shachris, you have them listed there. And have you ever noticed those? The Anima Minim in the back of the siddur. Those are the Rambams. So we're going to kind of be tackling with, well, how did they survive, and where is their agreement and where is their disagreement, and that last point is really important because in other religions, belief becomes such a hot topic. Like I mentioned, people kill each other over what they believe, and that never happened in Judaism. There's huge disagreements in belief, but what makes Judaism stand out from other religions is that no one, sure, there were plenty of people who disagreed with Rambam, but no one ever, accused him of being a heretic and said he ought to die. No one ever, threatened one another, and they were really heated debates. And when I was in university as a world religions major, I mean, that is actually shocking. That's actually unique. Most religions really can't claim that. Peaceful dialogue of these sorts of topics. People get really heated when they talk about these sorts of things. Another reason why I kind of put this class together, I mentioned that I'm a therapist, and when I was in university, one of my you have to work in practicum during the year, and so I was actually working in an organization called Yachad. Have you guys heard of Yachad? So they bring in different volunteers to work with the kids in the organization, and I was hanging out. There was this one guy who came in. He was a yeshiva guy. He was more there to flirt with the girls than anything else. So he was kind of like, okay, fine. And the way that he related to God really disturbed me. He was kind of getting the message that that again he was getting this sort of thing from the Rambam that God is so unknowable, God is so other, there's no way to describe God, that for whatever reason the rabbis or his friends or I don't know what were really pushing this idea that this idea of negative theology. The only way you can describe God is by describing what he's not. That's how big God is. You can't give him adjectives. And so it got so radical that he was describing, well, you can't even say God loves you, because love's a created concept, and God created everything. And, well, since he created it, God's not what he created, must be God can't love. And it was just such a shocking thing to hear. And it's a common belief, a common misconception that people have about the Rambam. And they kind of build their religious life as, again, almost being kind of like a zombie. No real purpose of, well, why are you here? And, well, God really doesn't care anyway, because, well, caring is a created concept. How could God ever care about you? And, well, it seems kind of lonely. And they really stuck with me. So this class is also kind of be pushing back against that sort of misconception also. So before diving into the 13 principles, I want to try and tackle a bigger question. Why did God create us to begin with? Have you guys had any classes on that yet, or Heard any ideas about that?
Not much.
Yeah.
He was bored.
What's that?
He was bored.
He was bored?
He was the only living thing.
Yeah.
To like occupy himself.
Yeah.
He needed the people to keep the torah.
Okay. Okay. That what?
I'd say he's lonely, but God doesn't really have feelings.
Yeah, it's so confusing
Yeah.
to be God. You
Yeah.
feel like nobody's on the same level. You can't like communicate with
Right.
people.
Right. That's that negative theology problem. Well, how do you describe God? Oh, he doesn't care. He's lonely, but how do you say that? I think that's pretty close.
Was God
I like lonely. The in Kabbalistic teachings, they describe how, well, God did create souls because I kind of heard that kind of pointed out as you kind of have to, in order to be God, who's the greatest giver there ever could be, well, you need someone to give to, right? So that who kind of hit on that idea? You have to kind of create something for God to fulfill Himself as
Be a God over something.
yeah. Well, but in the sense of being able to love others, to be infinitely loving requires there's someone to love. And so, we're all kind of imagining, you're all neshamas, all these souls kind of hanging out in heaven, we're hanging out with God. And God's loving us. And what was happening was, we were kind of just getting embarrassed, I think is a good way of describing it. We didn't really understand, well, why did God want to love us? What is this thing, love? It was more or less making people feel kind of uncomfortable. It's almost like you ever play a chess game where you knew the other guy was letting you win? You ever had that experience? No? Everyone always tried to beat you? It was kind of confusing. There was no context to what was going on. So God kind of,
When was it?
before God created the world, He first created us as souls, and just loving us, and we're just not getting
What we
it.
do is
Just receiving His love.
like we were just like sitting around like drinking coffee.
Well, we didn't. Yeah, right. Well, we had nothing to sit on, and there wasn't coffee, but we were just receiving love, and it was confusing. What is this thing, love? The emotional response our neshamas had was more or less something, like I said, akin to being embarrassed. We didn't understand what love was. Why are we worth loving? What is this idea? It was confusing. So what God decided to do was He said, well, you know what? I'm going to create a physical world, and I'm going to put you guys in the world. And the basic purpose of the world is to figure out what love is. So you're going to have all these challenges and all these experiences, and the golden thread that kind of runs through all of them is figuring out, well, what's love, what's responsibility, what's caring. So you can recognize it when you go back to God, that when He just keeps giving you love, that you'll be able to recognize it. It won't be an embarrassing, uncomfortable situation.
I don't get. So you're saying we don't have to do mitzvah? All we need to do is discover love, and then like we'll die, and then like we'll go to hell.
No, I didn't say that at all. Absolutely not.
So then it's not only just to discover love; it's also to do mitzvah.
Well, what I'd say is the only way to discover love is through action. That was kind of the solution God gave. That is a better way of describing it. Any nerds? Anybody who's interested in artificial intelligence? Yeah? Cool. So when they first started developing I'm a nerd too. When they first started developing artificial intelligence, so they thought...
Like Siri? Is that like Siri?
Yeah. Got a little bit, yeah. So what they tried to do was, they figured, well, all you have to do is program information into computers, and they'll understand the world. So that failed miserably. It simply didn't work. Something as simple as, I wish I had a board here, but can I use a piece of paper? Anyone want to give a piece of paper or have a pen? Awesome. Thank you. I like blue. Okay. Y'all see that?
What is that?
What is it?
It's a tree.
Best
There's a
guess.
dog behind you.
That's right. There you go. It's a tree and a dog.
Oh, how did you get that so close?
It could be a fox, whatever you want. It's some sort of animal, right? So that was good. There you go. Yeah.
That's what the AI would think.
That's right. Well, that was the problem. Artificial intelligence looked at this object and thought, well, what is this? Is this one object? Is it two objects? Is it three? It had no lack of a better term. It didn't have a body to interact with the world to understand it.
You can't learn object permanence from non-permanent things.
Exactly. Awesome. Exactly. So they would it would look at this sort of image and it wouldn't be able to interpret it. So these AI guys were working, trying to figure out how can they solve this problem. And finally, someone had the bright idea of, we'll just build a body for this robot. Let's give the robot arms. Let's give this robot a head. Let's give it some legs, and then program it and see if it can figure out things like this. And sure enough, it was able to. They didn't have to improve the programming at all. They just gave the thing a body. And all of a sudden, the world started to make sense. So this medrash is kind of like that disembodied information, spiritual ideas, like love, don't really make sense unless they exist within a context, some sort of physical body. So just like the AI guys said, well, let's give robots a body, God said, let's give people bodies. Artificial intelligence.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry. And getting back to the point that you were bringing up is, is that all you need to do? Like, well, the significance of halacha. Well, what halacha does is, the world's pretty complex, and halacha is a way of simplifying life to make it more understandable. It's like a map of meaning that you act out. And when you act out halacha, you're acting out things like love. You're acting out things like responsibility. You're acting out things like taking on other people's burdens and working out your own problems. And by behaving that way, you end up learning about what those things mean on an intellectual level and on a spiritual level. So that's the purpose of creation, learning what those concepts are, so that when we go back to God, we can recognize them. We can recognize that He loves us. So with that kind of in our pocket, so God created the world and God created us, and our mission is to figure out love. And halacha is the basic map, the basic structure that meaning kind of sits on, and we use that as a map to figure out our lives. And what the Rambam put forward is that there's something more basic. It's kind of like there's something more basic to halacha than just behaviors. There has to be some sort of cognitive component, some sort of belief aspect in the behavior for it to actually have meaning as well. We can't just behave out certain things. It's in a certain way that also lacks direction. It's better than just being a neshama, but we have to have both parts, a physical as well as a intellectual, spiritual aspect simultaneously working. So he put forth 13 principles, that these are the bare bones that has to always be running in the back of your mind as you go through life. And I'm going to list them off, and what we're going to be doing in this course is we're going to be exploring, expanding each. But just to kind of get some familiarity, the first belief you have to have is God exists. That He's unchanging, He's eternal, He causes all things to be. That's principle number one. Principle number two is that God has absolute unity. He's not made of stuff. He doesn't have parts. You can't mathematically quantify Him. So the best you can kind of do is say, well, God is one, but you can kind of separate one. You can break one into halves, obviously. So it's not quite, God is one in a numerical sense, but in His essence, He can't be broken down into parts. Let's put it that way. God doesn't have a body. God is incorporeal. Yeah.
Oh, I thought that all of us have part of Hashem in us.
Okay.
So
We'll definitely talk about that. You're right. We'll definitely talk about that.
But it's not like a physical oneness. Like it's in the way that like we have different aspects to our personality. Like all God is just one thing. So it's not like where he physically breaks off a piece of us, or like lights a different candle with the same flame, and that's our neshamas. It would be different.
Could be. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it. God is necessary. That's the next principle. And without God, there would not be anything. The next is that God. A good way of putting it is, it only makes sense to worship God. That's the next principle. Principle number 5. Number 6, there's such a thing as prophecy. We got that going on. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet ever to exist. That's the 7th principle. The 8th principle is that the Torah is divine. It's holy. We're going to get into what that exactly means. It's kind of an abstract idea. The next is that the Torah will never change. It's an eternal entity, for lack of a better term. And God knows stuff. That's the 10th principle. God knows our actions. The 11th principle is reward and punishment. Yeah, God does that sort of thing. Our actions have meaning. That's basically how you could translate that one into. There's going to be such a thing as a messianic age. We're going to get into what that means, because that's definitely not obvious what that one means. And the resurrection of the dead. Those are the 13 principles. And what the Rambam puts forward is that without believing in these 13 principles, see, the Rambam's kind of interesting. He again, taking on this idea that the whole purpose of life is understanding spiritual concepts like love. Well, you have to start somewhere. There has to be some sort of starting point that if you don't achieve that, at the very least, you haven't made the cut. And for the Rambam, these 13 principles are that baseline. That without coming to some understanding of these 13, well, the neshama didn't fulfill its basic purpose. At the same time, these 13 are not the end-all of Judaism. What's kind of cool about looking at this list is a lot is left out. There isn't mentioned anything about creation. There isn't mentioned anything about free will. Those are definitely very important principles in Judaism. But they're not what gives your soul eternal life. So we're going to discuss, well, what the devil does that mean? No one before the Rambam decided to get up and organize Judaism the way that he did. To create these 13 principles and put these forward as the way I'm putting it, there's nothing more important than getting these guys down. So why did it take so long for him to do that? So there was another rabbi by the name of Abarbanel. Have you guys heard the Abarbanel? Yeah? Cool. He has a really cool commentary on the Chumash. The way he goes about it, people kind of joke actually, because he writes in a very lengthy way, and what he does with his Chumash is he writes pages of difficulties in the text, and as you're going through it, you kind of read the Chumash doesn't make sense, and it's almost like he just tears apart the text. Well, if you only invest half an hour in reading the Abarbanel every Shabbos, the joke is everybody ends up coming away not getting to his answers, and everyone thinking, oh yeah, the Chumash doesn't make sense. If you're going to learn the Abarbanel and you don't want to drop religion, you want to get to the second part of his commentary. So the Abarbanel also wrote a book on the Rambam. He wasn't a fan, which is really kind of interesting because he writes this whole book, I think it was 12 chapters, of anyone who had ever tried to question the Rambam, who was trying to slug him up, he was fighting and defending, and you're getting the impression as you're reading this book, man, he's really gunning, he's really gunning for the Rambam. And you get to the final chapter, and he throws the Rambam under the bus. He disregards everything that he had written, the other 12 chapters, and puts it like this. He says the Rambam's wrong. There's no such thing as these 13 principles. In fact, every principle is important. You have to have faith in everything that the Torah says, and there's no more important principles. So he kind of answers, well, so why did the Rambam do it? And the Abarbanel more or less answers. His first reason is, well, he was trying to give people who would never have the time to actually learn something almost like, the skeleton of Judaism. That was his first answer. People who don't have time to go to yeshiva. And his second answer was, well, that was actually what everybody was doing during his time. So the Rambam lived in a really cool time period in human history where science was evolving from a more experiential sort of thing to getting more organized. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that in the next class. How the Rambam kind of fits into the development of scientific thought. But the way the Barbanel puts it kind of almost in a little bit of a not demeaning sort of way, but it's kind of like a throwaway. He's just kind of doing what everyone else is doing, creating rules and axioms, just like they're doing in math and other sciences. Well, he's just making Judaism into another science. And kind of looking at those two criticisms of the Rambam doesn't seem to add up. Because of what I was pointing out earlier is that the Rambam puts a lot on how important these principles are. He's basically saying your eternal life is dependent on some level kind of believing in these things. So it doesn't seem like that it's a throwaway sort of idea for people who don't have time to learn, or it's not that he's just kind of following the trend of everybody else that is tackling how to redefine science. It doesn't exactly quite make sense. And it also again kind of gets hit with this idea of, well, if that's the case, if he's just trying to give the cliff notes of Judaism, well, he left out a lot. He left out things like free will. He left out the concept of an afterlife. He left out all these very important ideas. So what gives? What gives? So I'm going to, as we push on, definitely going to be rejecting the Abarbanel's criticisms of the Rambam. There's a lot more to these 13 principles. So I wanted to maybe stop there, and kind of get you guys' feedback, how this sounds and what you'd be interested in learning about this topic as we push forward. Does it sound interesting? Not interesting? Yeah.
For me, I kind of just want to strengthen. Sometimes I doubt it.
Yeah.
About it, and it makes me crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Is it like you go through each one? Are these principles going to strengthen our faith, or what's the purpose?
What's the purpose?
To giving over these principles. Like, what's the goal for the class?
Things don't become real unless you treat them as being real. If you don't behave like something is real, it's not. That's how we work as people. Ideas are only ideas. That's all they ever get to be. And if an idea never actually develops into something that you do or interact with or play with,
How do you make it develop into something you do?
right?
But in
So-
that idea, though,
Yeah.
the 13 principles of faith are only ideas. We can't actualize them because they're just concepts that we have to believe in.
So
But
what?
that's still just an idea.
Yeah.
You can't act on that.
So what I'm hoping to do is by showing the complexity of these thoughts, how there isn't necessarily agreement on how we relate to God. Kind of pushes the question back in your direction of how do you feel comfortable and how do you want to relate to God? I mean, looking at one topic that's worth kind of thinking about is, well, these principles are based on the idea that the perfection of man is developing his intellect. Well, do you buy that? There's other authorities, like Or Hashem is another sefer that dealt with principles of faith. But he says that the goal of life is to develop love towards God. So what I guess I'm kind of wanting to do is crack open these sorts of questions. Kind of
balance of everything.
What's that?
Be a balance of everything.
That's another thought you could have. 100%.
Intellect is not going to help you get anywhere.
100%. So I guess I'm wanting to open that door a little bit to empower you guys to think about these questions. Because, well, if God, a lot of people kind of just think of God as like Santa Claus. He's watching you, making sure, he keeps track of everybody that's doing good or bad. He's keeping a list. Does that make sense to you? Doesn't make sense to me. So by kind of opening that door and getting a broader picture of, well, what could God be about, and what could life be about, and what is necessary to believe in, and do you agree with those things? That starts treating God like he's real, even though its idea is 100%. But by questioning that and playing around with it, all of a sudden now God, you're treating God like he's real. And that's really, I think, the goal of this sort of class. Treat God like he's real.
So what's the goal if, let's say, for me, I think God fully, I see him in everything that I do, but I also am selfish and I like to be comfortable and I do whatever I want to do. And what's the disconnect between you see God in everything and he's there in every decision you make, but you see God with it, but you just don't care.
A part of that, I think, getting back to what I said, a part of that is how often or how developed is that playing around with the God idea? How real is he, or how are you seeing him in the world? That's a complicated question. I don't want to necessarily answer you on one foot, but that's definitely something that we'd be addressing head on in this course. It's a good question. Okay. So I think people are filing in now, so we'll call it a day.